April 26, 1989. Peter, who has just finished tending his fields, makes his way back to his humble hut in Daulatpur, Bangladesh. The sky had been gloomy all afternoon. He'd better hurry. He gave the village one last glance before entering his hut. Cozy homes made of bamboo, clay, and tin roofs. This familiar sight of simple life had always managed to make Peter smile. He finally stepped into his small home. No TV, no radio, no technology in sight. He lit a candle for warmth, and a small fire to prepare dinner. Just another ordinary evening, until it wasn't. The dogs started barking wildly. Strong wind rushed through the gaps in Peter's bamboo walls. The rustling got louder. Roofs started to rattle. Peter stepped outside and froze. Maybe 2 miles away, a mile-long dark wall of cloud was charging straight toward him. Loud, terrifying, unforgiving. Around the twister, Peter could see debris, trees, and pieces of homes from the nearby village. And faintly, he could hear people's screams. He was frozen in place, but only for a second. Peter knew he had to find shelter, but it hit him. There was none. His fragile home had no basement, nor did his neighbors. The nearest building made of cement was miles away. There were no cars, no escape. No one in the village had anywhere to hide. Peter ran back inside his home, crawled under his wooden bed, shut his eyes, and he prayed, hoping somehow he would make it out alive. April 26, 1989, is a date permanently etched in tornado history. It's the day when an estimated EF4 or EF5 tornado carved a 50-mile path through central Bangladesh, from Daulatpur to the north of Saturia. It left behind a tragically record-breaking death toll, something never seen before anywhere in the world. Over 1,300 lives lost, more than 12,000 injured, and 80,000 people were displaced from their homes. Peter, the farmer we talked about, wasn't an actual person, but his story reflects the fearful moments of hundreds of people living the simple lives in Bangladesh that day.
A tree fell near our house and struck my neighbor. We rushed her to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her. I didn't think the storm would be this strong. I went to close the window, but before I could, the roof was already gone.
No number can capture the devastation of this tornado. Not even the staggering death toll fully explains it. To truly understand just how catastrophic this tornado was, you have to go beyond just the tornado's effects. You have to look at the economy, the politics, and the overall condition of Bangladesh in 1989. Only then does it become clear that the tornado wasn't just deadly because of its direct results. It was lethal because it turned what was already one of Bangladesh's harshest years into something far worse. The 1989 tragedy in Bangladesh didn't just start with a low-pressure system. Even before the tornado, the country was already in crisis. By April, large parts of Bangladesh had been suffering through a brutal 6-month drought, affecting nearly 5 million people. Rivers dried up, crops failed, entire villages were left without drinking water, dust storms regularly swept across the land, and making it worse, the government was unstable, still in its infancy. It had been only 18 years since Bangladesh gained independence from Pakistan. The country was still struggling to rebuild itself from scratch. Poverty was everywhere, and nothing reflected that more clearly than the homes people lived in. Most houses were made of bamboo, clay, or sheets of tin, fragile, temporary, and utterly defenseless against violent storms. People knew these homes wouldn't protect them. But what was the alternative? Every cloudy sky was a gamble between much-needed rain or life-ending disaster. After all, Bangladesh is no stranger to floods, cyclones, and worst, tornadoes. In fact, some of the deadliest tornadoes in recorded history have happened right here. Yes, 1989 wasn't the first time a deadly tornado struck Bangladesh. It had been constantly hit by twisters far stronger than the worst representatives of America's tornado alley. But chances are, you've never heard that before. When people think of tornado disasters, they think of the United States, the super outbreak of 2011, the tri-state tornado of 1925, or Joplin. But here's the thing, many of those tornadoes don't even come close to the loss of life that tornadoes in Bangladesh have caused. Even before the 1989 Daulatpur-Saturia twister, the country had already suffered several catastrophic tornadoes. In 1973, 681 people were killed by a tornado in Manikganj. The unofficial death toll exceeded 1,000. Near Salinama village, 500 people were killed by a twister in 1977. And in 1996, 700 people were killed as a family of tornadoes swept across the Tangal district. For context, America's deadliest tornado, the tri-state tornado of 1925, killed 695 people. The next deadliest had a fatality count of about half that number. Of course, this isn't about comparing tragedies. For victims, no tragedy is easier just because it involves fewer deaths. The point is, Bangladesh has always been a major tornado hotspot. The world just didn't seem to notice. And sadly, Bangladesh itself didn't seem to care. Because despite being one of the most tornado-prone regions on Earth, the Bangladesh government had zero tornado forecasting technologies in 1989. And that lack of preparedness sealed the fate of thousands on April 26th of that year. Hearing anything with 1989 in it might sound like a whole different century. But by that time, meteorology was already taking big steps forward. The US was already rolling out Doppler radar, and tornado warnings were being issued with 10 minutes or more of lead time. TV stations would break into programs, and radios would blare alerts telling people to move when tornadoes were on their way. Unfortunately, in Bangladesh, things were different. For cities and rural villages of the country alike, the forecast of 1989 was basically just looking at the sky. The government had no preparedness for tornadoes. Perhaps there simply wasn't enough financial support. Or there were other urgent matters, like addressing poverty and rebuilding the economy. But maybe they should have paid better attention to natural disaster preparedness. Because the day before, the atmosphere was already flashing loud warning signs that something bad was coming. And if it had been caught earlier, maybe the death toll and injuries wouldn't have been so high. April 25th, 1989. A low-pressure system had been stalling over West Bengal, just next door to Bangladesh. At the same time, cool, dry air from the Himalayan foothills drifted south across northwestern India, meeting warm, moisture-rich air rising from the Bay of Bengal. The result was extreme instability in the atmosphere, the kind of setup that makes severe storms not just possible, but very likely. High above, the jet stream also added powerful wind shear, twisting winds in different directions at different altitudes. Come the next day, April 26, 1989, a secondary low-pressure system from Nepal pushed into the region, tightening the pressure gradient and helping form a sharp dry line over western Bangladesh. This invisible boundary between dry and moist air became the trigger for what was about to unfold. And as daytime heating on the day of April 26th intensified, the atmosphere over central Bangladesh became supercharged. All the ingredients were now in place: shear, lift, instability, and moisture, all working together. By 6 p.m., without any forecasts, sirens, or warnings, a supercell thunderstorm took shape. By 6:30 p.m., that storm produced what would become the deadliest tornado in recorded history. No sirens, no tornado warnings, You would have been lucky if you had enough time to look up before it was too late. More than 1,300 deaths, over 1,200 injuries, 80,000 people homeless, $1.5 million in reported damage. All of these numbers barely scratch the surface of what the locals lost that day. Summarizing the impacts of this tornado in mere numbers doesn't even come close to doing the traumatic event in the area justice. Think about it, maintaining an average speed of 62 miles per hour, with peak winds estimated at over 300 miles per hour. This twister was never slower than a speeding car. So, in a country like Bangladesh, where almost every home was made of flimsy materials, nothing in its path stood a chance. Houses, farms, and schools were all leveled. Trees were uprooted. Crops that had somehow survived the drought were shredded. Livestock, often the only economic hope for many families amid the drought, were found dead, scattered for miles. Entire villages, entire families, gone in seconds. In Saturia, the most populated town in the tornado's path, the impacts were the worst. After the tornado, locals stepped out, hearing the distant screams of neighbors impaled by debris or holding their dying loved ones. Fires broke out left and right. There was no telling what would happen to them next. People's best chances of survival would have been crouching in corners, closets, anywhere that might give even a slim shot at protection. But against winds that strong, the most solid wooden door might as well have been paper. You have to realize this tornado wasn't just wind, it was sharp debris, roof panels, sheets of iron, entire walls being spun around like confetti. If you were caught in the lift, you'd no longer be alive even if you landed gently on the ground. So, by the time the tornado was over, it was all nothingness. No community, no neighbors, no more jobs. Lost loved ones, broken homes. Worst of all, no help was coming anytime soon. There was barely any footage of the Daulatpur-Saturia tornado rescue efforts. However, even based on the few clips released, it's evident how completely it crippled the already struggling community of rural Bangladesh.
The army personnel who have been deployed here, I believe their sincerity is not lacking, but they haven't yet fully understood what needs to be done. They are all arriving now.
There was no medical team or rescue squad that rushed to the site minutes after the tornado. There weren't huge cranes and hundreds of soldiers conducting rescue operations. Yes, they eventually arrived, but to bury bodies, not to save lives. All that was left in the silence after that giant cloud passed was the scarred community trying to piece its very self back together. Because, as harsh as this sounds, the reality is that the government back then wasn't of much help, especially in the beginning. After the winds settled, locals looked around in confusion, wondering what to do next. Should they scramble to find missing loved ones? Or should they already grieve, as there weren't going to be rescue efforts underway? Rubble made of sharp, twisted metal and splintered wood, towering meters high, was everywhere. Even kids, as fragile as twigs, tried to help. There was no designated refuge area to gather, no hot meals, no comforting soup waiting inside a hall. Injured survivors screamed their lungs out, impaled by rods or sheet metal. And the only people who could help were other survivors, just as traumatized. It took weeks for some villages to receive government help, only to be handed a single cup of uncooked rice with nowhere to cook it and nothing to pair it with. When international aid finally came in, it mostly reached those along the main roads. Those who were further inland, forgotten. A couple of medical tents and support camps were set up. But how exactly was a handful of tinier-than-clinic temporary shelters supposed to handle an entire village worth of injured people? 80,000 people. A crowd big enough to fill an entire NFL stadium, suddenly homeless, with no roofs, not even a single tree to shield them from the heat. families buried their loved ones in mass graves when bodies were already decomposing in their unrecognizable state. It's a complex topic to criticize a government, especially one we don't live under. But any meteorological expert would agree that Bangladesh, at the time, could have done so much better, before and after this tragic event. No one in the country was in charge of monitoring or forecasting tornadoes of any scale. In fact, those who tried, assigning an EF3 rating to this twister, couldn't even explain the methodologies they used to rate it. It would have been nice to end this video by saying this lack of disaster management is now a thing of the past. But unfortunately, it isn't, not even today. Bangladesh is in a better economic position than it was in 1989, and is now one of the fastest growing economies. Today, it has some emergency response units and disaster relief efforts. But up to this day, it still has no tornado forecasting, no preparedness programs, no tornado warning systems. The locals still aren't educated about these natural disasters either. Education that could possibly encourage stronger construction, better homes, or community-safe hubs. Now, if you're thinking, would adding any of this have made a difference? Absolutely, and a whole world of difference. For context, when the United States implemented effective tornado warnings, fatalities from tornadoes of the same intensity were cut in half. Hopefully, as more channels or journalists cover natural disasters like this, governments, including the one in Bangladesh, will be pressured into better implementation of warning systems and disaster preparedness.